In the summer of 1943, when the world was burning and women were supposed to stay quiet, Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez learned that some fights choose you whether you're ready or not. She had survived 18 months of military bureaucracy, countless condescending remarks, and the daily grind of proving herself worthy of wearing the uniform. But nothing had prepared her for the moment when Major William Hartwell's fist came flying toward her face in front of 24 witnesses. What happened next lasted exactly 47 seconds. It would be talked about in hushed whispers for decades, inspire 3 congressional inquiries, and fundamentally change how the U.S. military handled assault cases involving female personnel. But, in that moment, as Elena's training kicked in and her body moved with precision that surprised even her, all she knew was that she wasn't going down without a fight. This is the story of a woman who refused to be another casualty of a system designed to break her spirit. It's about the price of standing up when everyone expects you to fall down, and what happens when the person throwing the first punch severely underestimates who they're dealing with. Elena Rodriguez had dirt under her fingernails and steel in her spine long before she ever set foot on a military base. Growing up as the youngest of 5 children in a cramped apartment above her father's auto repair shop in East Los Angeles, she learned early that respect wasn't something you asked for politely. It was something you earned with your fists if necessary, and kept with your wits always. Her father, Miguel Rodriguez, had come back from the Great War with a limp in his left leg and a firm belief that his daughter could do anything his sons could do, only better. While other fathers in the neighborhood were teaching their daughters to cook and so, Miguel was showing Elena how to change oil, read engine diagnostics, and throw a punch that would drop a man twice her size. Mija, he would tell her, grease-coating his weathered hands as they worked side by side under the hood of some broken-down Buick, the world's gonna try to tell you what you can't do every single day. Your job isn't to listen. Your job is to prove them wrong. Elena took those words to heart. When the neighborhood boys tried to push her around on her way to school, she pushed back harder. When her high school guidance counselor suggested she consider secretarial work instead of the engineering program she wanted, Elena signed up for advanced mathematics and physics instead. And, when the bombing of Pearl Harbor happened during her senior year, transforming the entire country overnight, Elena knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life. The Women's Army Auxiliary Corps had been established just months earlier, and Elena walked into the recruitment office on her 18th birthday with her birth certificate, high school diploma, and a letter of recommendation from her physics teacher. The recruiter, a tired-looking sergeant named Williams, looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "You sure about this, sweetheart?" he asked, tapping his pen against his clipboard. Military life isn't exactly a picnic. Lots of young ladies think they want adventure until they realize what they're signing up for. Elena met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not looking for a picnic, Sergeant. I'm looking to serve my country." The physical examination was rigorous, designed to weed out women who couldn't handle the demands of military life. Elena breezed through every test. The written examination covered everything from basic mathematics to geography to current events. Elena finished in half the allotted time and scored in the 98th percentile. The psychological evaluation was meant to identify women who might crack under pressure. Elena answered every question with honest directness that seemed to catch the examining officer off guard. "What would you do if a superior officer gave you an order you disagreed with?" the psychiatrist asked, peering at her over his wire-rimmed glasses. "Follow the order, sir, assuming it was legal and within the scope of my duties," Elena replied. "Then, find the appropriate channels to voice my concerns if the situation warranted it." "And if those channels proved ineffective?" Elena paused, considering her words carefully. "I suppose that would depend on the severity of the situation and whether lives were at stake, sir." The psychiatrist made a note on his pad. "You strike me as someone who's comfortable with confrontation, Miss Rodriguez." "I'm comfortable with standing up for what's right, sir." "If that leads to confrontation, then, so be it." 6 weeks later, Elena received her acceptance letter and orders to report to Fort Des Moines, Iowa, for basic training. Her mother cried when she left, clutching Elena's hands at the train station platform. Her father shook her hand like she was a business partner, his eyes bright with pride. "Remember what I taught you, Mija," he said quietly. "And remember that you're representing all of us now. Fort Des Moines was a shock to the system even for someone as prepared as Elena thought she was. The barracks were crowded, the food was terrible, and the schedule was relentless. Reveille at 5:30 in the morning, calisthenics before breakfast, then hours of drilling, classroom instruction, and physical conditioning that left most of the women exhausted and homesick. Elena thrived. She excelled at marksmanship, earning the highest scores in her training company. She mastered the military protocols and procedures that left other recruits confused and frustrated. She could field strip a rifle blindfolded in under 2 minutes and had memorized the entire military code of conduct within her first week. But it wasn't just her technical skills that set Elena apart. It was her leadership ability and her willingness to stand up for the other women in her unit when the male training officers decided to make examples of them. The first incident happened during her third week of training. Private Sarah Mitchell from rural Kansas had been struggling with the physical conditioning requirements, and Drill Sergeant Baker had decided to make her do extra push-ups in front of the entire company while he berated her about weak women who didn't belong in uniform. Elena watched Mitchell's arms shake as she tried to complete the exercise, saw the tears of humiliation and exhaustion streaming down her face, and felt something cold and hard settle in her stomach. When Sergeant Baker started making crude jokes about Mitchell's body while she struggled, Elena stepped forward. "Permission to speak, Drill Sergeant." Baker turned, eyebrows raised in surprise. "What is it, Rodriguez?" "Private Mitchell has completed the required physical training for today, Drill Sergeant. The additional exercise appears to be punitive rather than instructional." The entire company went dead silent. Baker's face flushed red as he processed what had just happened. A female recruit had just challenged his authority in front of dozens of witnesses. "Are you questioning my training methods, Private?" Elena's voice remained steady and respectful. "I'm requesting clarification on the educational purpose of the current exercise, Drill Sergeant." Baker stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Elena could feel the eyes of every woman in the company on her, could sense their held breath, their silent prayers that she wouldn't make things worse for all of them. But she also knew that if she backed down now, if she let this moment pass without standing up for Mitchell, then everything her father had taught her about courage and integrity would be meaningless. "Private Mitchell," Baker finally said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you're dismissed from exercise. Return to your bunk and prepare for evening inspection." Mitchell scrambled to her feet and hurried away, shooting Elena a grateful look as she passed. Baker turned his attention back to Elena. "Private Rodriguez, since you seem so concerned about the training methods in my company, you can complete Private Mitchell's remaining exercises." Double time. Elena dropped into position without hesitation. "Yes, Drill Sergeant." She completed 50 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, and a 2-mile run while the rest of the company watched. By the time she finished, her muscles were screaming and her uniform was soaked with sweat, but she had proven her point. She could take whatever punishment was dished out, and she wouldn't let her fellow soldiers be abused without consequence. Word of the incident spread quickly through the base. Some of the other drill sergeants began testing Elena, pushing her harder to see if she would break or complain. She never did. Instead, she seemed to get stronger and more determined with each challenge. Her commanding officer, Captain Patricia Mills, called Elena into her office after hearing about several such incidents. "Sit down, Private Rodriguez," Mills said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Mills was a career officer, one of the few women who had managed to earn a commission in the regular army rather than the auxiliary corps. She had a reputation for fairness but also for brooking no nonsense from anyone under her command. "I've been hearing interesting things about you," Mills continued, studying Elena with sharp eyes. "Some of my fellow officers think you might be a troublemaker." Elena kept her expression neutral. "I hope my performance has been satisfactory, ma'am." "Your performance has been exceptional, and you know it," Mills replied. "Top scores in every category, perfect attendance, no disciplinary issues despite some rather creative attempts by certain members of my staff to find fault with you." Elena said nothing, waiting for the captain to get to her point. Mills leaned back in her chair. The question is whether you're going to be the kind of soldier who follows orders and keeps her head down, or the kind who causes problems by standing up for every perceived injustice she encounters.
Ma'am, I believe those two things aren't mutually exclusive. Explain.
Elena chose her words carefully. Following orders and maintaining discipline are essential to military effectiveness. But, so is ensuring that all personnel are treated with the respect and dignity they deserve as members of the United States military.
If standing up for that principle occasionally causes problems, then, I suppose that's a risk I'm willing to take.
Mills studied her for a long moment, then smiled slightly. You know, Rodriguez, 20 years ago I might have given you a lecture about keeping your mouth shut and following the chain of command. But times are changing, whether some people want to admit it or not. She pulled out Elena's training file and flipped through it. Your test scores indicate you'd be well suited for administrative or communications work.
Safe assignments, good opportunities for advancement.
You could have a very comfortable military career if you play your cards right.
Elena felt a sinking sensation in her stomach.
She had joined the military to serve her country, not to spend the war filing paperwork in some safe office far from any real action. However, Mills continued, there's been a request from the Intelligence Division for women with your particular combination of skills and temperament.
Combat support roles, mostly overseas assignments.
Dangerous work, little recognition, and you'd be working closely with men who aren't necessarily happy about having women in their units.
Elena's pulse quickened. What kind of work, ma'am? Communications, translation, liaison work with resistance groups.
The kind of assignments where you might find yourself in situations where someone needs to stand up for what's right, even when it's not convenient or safe to do so.
Elena didn't hesitate. I'm interested, ma'am. Mills nodded as if she had expected that answer. I thought you might be. Your orders will come through in a few days. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare yourself. The men you'll be working with aren't drill sergeants looking to make a point. They're combat officers dealing with life and death situations every day. They don't have time or patience for politics or social progress.
She leaned forward, her expression becoming serious. Some of them are going to test you in ways that will make Sergeant Baker's little games look like playground nonsense.
The question is whether you're ready for that.
Elena thought about her father's words, about the lessons learned in the auto shop and on the streets of East Los Angeles.
I'll do whatever my country asks of me, ma'am.
Mills smiled again, but this time there was something almost predatory in her expression.
I'm sure you will, Rodriguez. I'm sure you will. Elena's new assignment took her to England, where she found herself stationed at a joint intelligence facility outside London that didn't officially exist.
The work was exactly what Captain Mills had promised, dangerous, unrecognized, and essential. Elena spent her days monitoring enemy radio transmissions, translating intercepted documents, and coordinating with resistance fighters across occupied Europe. The facility was a converted manor house surrounded by high walls and guard towers, staffed by a mix of American, British, and Free French personnel who worked together with the kind of urgent efficiency that only comes from knowing that people's lives depend on your success.
Elena loved every challenging minute of it.
Her immediate supervisor was Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, a British intelligence officer who had initially been skeptical about having women in his operation but had grudgingly admitted that Elena's language skills and analytical abilities were invaluable. The work required long hours, constant attention to detail, and the ability to make life or death decisions based on incomplete information.
Elena excelled at all of it.
Within 3 months, she had been promoted to staff sergeant and put in charge of a team of 6 other women who handled communications with resistance groups in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The responsibility was enormous. A single mistake in transmitting coordinates or timing could result in the capture and execution of dozens of people who were risking everything to fight the Nazi occupation. Elena took the responsibility seriously, working 16-hour days and sleeping in her office more often than in her assigned quarters. She developed a reputation among the resistance fighters for reliability and quick thinking. When radio transmissions were intercepted by German forces, Elena could improvise new codes on the fly. When planned operations had to be changed at the last minute, Elena found ways to get new instructions to the right people without compromising security. The other American officers at the facility began to take notice. Some, like Colonel Morrison, respected her competence and professionalism. Others, particularly the ones who had been rotated in from traditional combat units, were less enthusiastic about taking orders from a woman, even indirectly. The tension came to a head when Major William Hartwell was transferred to the facility in June 1943. Hartwell was a career infantry officer who had been wounded during the North Africa campaign and reassigned to intelligence work while he recovered. He was 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the kind of aggressive confidence that some men use to compensate for feeling diminished by circumstances beyond their control. From his first day at the facility, Hartwell made it clear that he disapproved of women serving in operational roles. He questioned Elena's decisions in staff meetings, demanded detailed explanations for routine procedures that other officers accepted without comment, and made a point of addressing her as Miss Rodriguez rather than by her rank. Elena initially tried to handle the situation diplomatically. She provided the explanations Hartwell demanded, maintained her professionalism when he questioned her competence, and focused on doing her job rather than engaging in personality conflicts. But Hartwell seemed determined to provoke a confrontation. The first serious incident occurred during a planning meeting for an operation to supply weapons to resistance fighters in occupied France. Elena had spent weeks developing the logistics plan, coordinating with contacts on the ground, and working out the timing with Royal Air Force pilots who would be making the dangerous supply drops. Hartwell interrupted her presentation to question whether her contacts could be trusted. "How do we know these resistance fighters aren't compromised?" he demanded, jabbing his finger at the map Elena had prepared. "How do we know this isn't a trap set up by German intelligence?" Elena kept her voice calm and professional. "We've been working with this particular cell for 8 months, sir. They've successfully received 4 previous supply drops and provided actionable intelligence that has been verified through multiple sources." "But you've never met them face to face, have you?" Hartwell pressed. "You're basing the lives of American pilots on radio conversations with people you wouldn't recognize if they walked into this room." Colonel Morrison intervened before Elena could respond. "Major Hartwell, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez has an excellent track record with resistance coordination. I'm confident in her assessment of the situation." Hartwell's face flushed red, but he backed down. After the meeting, however, he cornered Elena in the hallway. "Don't think this is over," he said quietly, standing uncomfortably close to her. "I don't care what Morrison thinks. Women don't belong in operational roles, and I'm going to prove it." Elena looked up at him without flinching. "Major, I'd be happy to discuss any concerns you have about my performance through appropriate channels. If you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She started to walk away, but Hartwell grabbed her arm. "I'm not done talking to you." Elena looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. When she spoke, her voice was ice cold. "Sir, I suggest you remove your hand. Now." Something in her tone must have gotten through to him, because Hartwell released her arm and stepped back. But the look in his eyes promised that this confrontation was only the beginning. Over the next several weeks, Hartwell escalated his campaign against Elena. He filed formal complaints about her insubordinate attitude and unprofessional conduct. He requested that she be transferred to a purely administrative role. He spread rumors among the other officers that she was sleeping with Colonel Morrison to advance her career. Elena weathered all of it with the same steady professionalism she had learned during her father's lessons about dealing with bullies. She documented every incident, reported Hartwell's behavior through proper channels, and continued to perform her duties at the highest level. But the stress was taking a toll. She was sleeping poorly, eating irregularly, and finding it increasingly difficult to concentrate on her work. The other women in her unit began to notice the change in her demeanor and started avoiding interactions with Hartwell to prevent making Elena's situation worse. The breaking point came on a sweltering July afternoon when Elena was working late in her office, trying to coordinate a complex operation that would involve simultaneous supply drops to 3 different resistance cells. The timing was critical, and any mistakes could result in disaster.
Elena had been at her desk for 12 hours straight, surviving on coffee and determination, when Hartwell appeared in her doorway.
He had clearly been drinking, which was against regulations but not uncommon among officers who were struggling with the stress of their assignments. "Working late again, Miss Rodriguez," he slurred, leaning against the doorframe.
Or should I say, working alone? I notice Colonel Morrison isn't here to protect you tonight. Elena didn't look up from her paperwork. "Major Hartwell, it's after hours and you appear to be intoxicated. I suggest you return to your quarters."
Hartwell laughed harshly and stepped into her office, closing the door behind him.
"You know what your problem is? You think you're as good as a man. You think you deserve the same respect, the same authority."
Elena finally looked up, her hand moving instinctively toward the letter opener on her desk.
"Major, you need to leave. Now."
"But you're not as good as a man," Hartwell continued, moving closer to her desk.
"You're just a little girl playing dress-up in a soldier's uniform.
And, sooner or later, someone's going to remind you of what you really are." Elena stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor.
"Sir, you are out of line. I'm ordering you to leave my office immediately." Hartwell's face twisted with rage. "You're ordering me? You're giving orders to a superior officer?" He moved around the desk toward her, and Elena backed toward the wall. She had faced down bullies before, but never while trapped in a small room with a drunk man who outweighed her by 70 pounds and seemed to be losing control of his temper. "You need to learn your place," Hartwell snarled, reaching for her. Elena dodged his grab and tried to get around him to reach the door, but Hartwell was faster than his intoxicated state had suggested. He caught her arm and spun her around, slamming her back against the wall. "Let me go," Elena said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her body. "This is assault, Major. You're making a mistake you're going to regret." Hartwell pressed closer, pinning her against the wall with his body weight. "The only mistake I made was letting a little Mexican bitch think she could give me orders." That was when Elena's training kicked in.
Her father had taught her that there comes a moment in every confrontation when talking stops working and action becomes the only option. She had learned to recognize that moment by watching Miguel Rodriguez deal with difficult customers who thought they could intimidate him because of his accent or the color of his skin. Elena brought her knee up hard into Hartwell's groin, causing him to double over in pain and surprise. As he bent forward, she grabbed his head and brought it down to meet her rising knee, connecting solidly with his nose and sending him staggering backward. Hartwell straightened up, blood streaming from his broken nose, his eyes wide with shock and rage. "You little bitch," he gasped. "I'll kill you for that." He swung wildly at Elena's face, but she had already moved. 3 years of working in her father's garage had given her quick reflexes and strong hands. 18 months of military training had taught her how to use those assets effectively. Elena ducked under Hartwell's swing and drove her fist into his solar plexus, knocking the wind out of him. As he bent over gasping for breath, she grabbed his arm and used his own momentum to throw him over her hip in a perfect judo throw that sent him crashing into her filing cabinets. The sound of metal drawers slamming shut and papers scattering across the floor brought Elena back to reality. Major William Hartwell, her superior officer, was lying on the floor of her office, unconscious and bleeding, while she stood over him with scraped knuckles and adrenaline coursing through her system. Elena looked at her watch. It was 11:47 p.m. The night shift skeleton crew would be making rounds in about 10 minutes. She had approximately 9 minutes to figure out how to explain why she had just knocked out a major in the United States Army. Elena stared down at Major Hartwell's unconscious form for exactly 15 seconds, her mind racing through options. She could call for help and report the assault, but who would believe her word against a superior officer's? She could try to wake him up and pretend nothing had happened, but the blood from his broken nose and the destroyed filing cabinet made that impossible. She could run, but that would only make her look guilty and ruin any chance of vindication. Instead, Elena did what her father had always taught her to do when faced with an impossible situation. She told the truth and prepared to face the consequences. She walked to her desk, picked up the telephone, and dialed the number for the duty officer.
When Sergeant Collins answered, Elena spoke clearly and calmly. Sergeant Collins, this is Staff Sergeant Rodriguez.
I need you to contact Colonel Morrison immediately and inform him that there has been an incident in my office requiring immediate attention. Also, please send the medical officer to Building C, Room 217.
What kind of incident, Staff Sergeant? Elena looked back at Hartwell, who was beginning to stir slightly.
Major Hartwell attempted to sexually assault me in my office.
I defended myself. He's unconscious and requires medical attention.
The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several heartbeats.
Did you say? Major Hartwell is unconscious, ma'am? That's correct, Sergeant.
Please make those calls immediately. Elena hung up the phone and sat down at her desk to wait. She used the time to write a detailed account of everything that had happened, starting with Hartwell's pattern of harassment and ending with the moment she had thrown him across the room. She wrote in the same precise, factual style she used for operational reports, knowing that every word would be scrutinized by military investigators. Colonel Morrison arrived within 20 minutes, accompanied by the base medical officer, the military police, and a British intelligence liaison who looked like he had been roused from bed.
Elena stood and saluted as they entered her destroyed office.
Morrison surveyed the scene, the overturned filing cabinets, the scattered papers, the blood on the wall where Hartwell had hit his head, and Hartwell himself, now conscious but groggy, sitting on the floor while the medical officer examined his broken nose. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Morrison said carefully, I need you to tell me exactly what happened here.
Elena handed him the written account she had prepared.
It's all there, sir. Major Hartwell entered my office after hours, appeared to be intoxicated, made sexually explicit threats, and physically assaulted me.
I defended myself using reasonable force.
Hartwell struggled to his feet, pushing away the medic's hands. His face was swollen, his uniform was torn, and dried blood covered his chin. She's lying, he slurred through his damaged nose. I came here to discuss operational matters and she attacked me without provocation. The British liaison, a thin man with sharp eyes named Captain Pemberton, stepped forward.
Major Hartwell, you were scheduled for duty rotation to London tomorrow. What operational matters required your attention at nearly midnight?
Hartwell's eyes darted around the room as he tried to come up with an answer.
There were concerns about security protocols. Questions about her contacts with resistance fighters.
Elena remained silent, letting Hartwell dig his own grave with increasingly implausible explanations. She had learned from her father that when someone is lying under pressure, the best thing to do is give them enough rope to hang themselves. Morrison read through Elena's written account, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finished, he looked up at Hartwell with disgust.
Major, you're relieved of duty pending a full investigation. Sergeant Collins will escort you to the medical facility for treatment, and then, you'll be confined to quarters until further notice.
Hartwell's face flushed red despite his injuries.
You're taking her word over mine? The word of some Mexican whore over a decorated officer?
The words hung in the air like a physical slap. Elena felt something cold and dangerous settle in her chest, but she forced herself to remain at attention.
Morrison's jaw tightened visibly.
Major Hartwell, Morrison said quietly, I strongly suggest you stop talking.
Anything else you say will only make your situation worse.
The military police escorted Hartwell from the room, leaving Elena alone with Morrison, Captain Pemberton, and the medic. Morrison studied Elena's face, noting the bruises on her arms where Hartwell had grabbed her and the scraped knuckles on her right hand.
Are you injured, Staff Sergeant?
Nothing that requires medical attention, sir. Morrison nodded to the medic, who left to attend to Hartwell.
That left Elena alone with the two intelligence officers who would determine her fate.
This is going to be complicated, Captain Pemberton said bluntly. Hartwell has friends in high places, connections in the Pentagon who aren't going to be pleased about a female enlisted person assaulting a field-grade officer.
Elena kept her expression neutral. I understand, sir.
Morrison walked over to examine the filing cabinets that had been damaged in the fight.
How much force did you use, Rodriguez?
Only what was necessary to stop the assault and protect myself, sir. I attempted to de-escalate the situation verbally, but Major Hartwell was intoxicated and became physically violent.
And you knocked him unconscious?
He lost consciousness when he hit the filing cabinet after I threw him, sir.
It wasn't my intention to cause that level of injury.
Morrison turned to look at her with something that might have been admiration.
Where did you learn to fight like that? My father taught me basic self-defense, sir. And I received hand-to-hand combat training during basic training.
Captain Pemberton snorted with laughter. Basic training teaches recruits how to handle a drunken soldier in a bar fight, not how to incapacitate a man who outweighs them by 70 pounds.
Elena met his gaze steadily. My father owned a garage in East Los Angeles, sir.
He felt it was important that I know how to defend myself. The investigation that followed was thorough and uncomfortable. Elena was questioned for hours by military investigators, psychiatrists, and intelligence officials who seemed determined to find some flaw in her story or evidence that she had provoked the attack. They interviewed every person who had witnessed Hartwell's harassment, examined her personnel file for any signs of disciplinary problems, and subjected her to medical examinations to document her injuries. Throughout it all, Elena maintained the same calm professionalism that had carried her through every challenge since joining the military. She answered every question honestly, provided every document requested, and submitted to every examination without complaint. The other women in her unit rallied around her, providing statements about Hartwell's behavior and Elena's character. Several of the male officers also came forward to report incidents they had witnessed, painting a picture of systematic harassment that had been escalating for months. But it was the physical evidence that proved most convincing. The blood spatter patterns in Elena's office supported her account of defending herself against an attacker. The damage to the filing cabinets was consistent with someone being thrown rather than simply falling down. Most importantly, the medical examination of Hartwell revealed that his injuries were entirely defensive in nature, the kind of damage someone would sustain if they were the aggressor in a fight they lost. After 2 weeks of investigation, the military court convened to hear the case. Elena sat in the defendant's chair wearing her dress uniform, her medals polished and her bearing perfect, as a parade of witnesses testified about what kind of soldier and person she was. Colonel Morrison took the stand to describe her exceptional performance and dedication. Captain Mills, who had flown in from Iowa, testified about Elena's character and leadership abilities. Even some of the resistance fighters Elena had worked with sent statements through secure channels, describing how her competence and reliability had saved lives. When Hartwell took the stand in his own defense, his story fell apart under cross-examination. He contradicted himself multiple times, couldn't explain what operational matters had required his presence in Elena's office at midnight, and became increasingly agitated when pressed for details. When the prosecutor asked him to explain the racist slur he had used against Elena, Hartwell claimed he couldn't remember saying it.
Elena's testimony was brief and factual.
She recounted the events of that night without emotion, explaining her actions in the same calm voice she used to coordinate dangerous operations. When the defense attorney tried to suggest that she had overreacted to what might have been innocent advances, Elena's response was devastating. "Sir, there is nothing innocent about a superior officer entering a subordinate's office after hours, closing the door, making sexually explicit threats, and then physically restraining that subordinate against her will. I used the minimum force necessary to protect myself from what I reasonably believed to be an imminent threat of sexual assault." The court deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the presiding judge's verdict was unambiguous: all charges against Elena were dismissed, and Major Hartwell was found guilty of assault, conduct unbecoming an officer, and violation of military regulations regarding treatment of subordinates. Hartwell was stripped of his rank, dishonorably discharged from the army, and sentenced to 18 months in military prison. Elena was not only exonerated but commended for her courage in reporting the incident and her professionalism throughout the investigation. But the real victory came 6 months later, when Elena received new orders promoting her to warrant officer and assigning her to a special operations unit that worked directly with the Office of Strategic Services. The promotion came with a personal note from the commanding general praising her exceptional courage, competence, and commitment to the highest standards of military service.
Elena's case became a watershed moment for military policy regarding assault and harassment. Her detailed documentation of Hartwell's behavior led to new training requirements for officers and clearer procedures for reporting misconduct. More importantly, it established a precedent that female military personnel had the same right to defend themselves as their male counterparts, and that claims of self-defense would be taken seriously regardless of the rank disparity between the parties involved. 20 years later, when Elena was teaching criminal justice at UCLA and serving as an advocate for veterans' rights, a young journalist asked her if she ever regretted fighting back instead of trying to handle the situation diplomatically. Elena, by then, a retired colonel with a Distinguished Service Cross and 2 Bronze Stars, smiled at the question. "Young lady," she said, "my father taught me that there's a time for diplomacy and a time for action. When someone puts their hands on you without permission, diplomacy is over. The only question is whether you're going to be a victim or a survivor." She leaned back in her chair, her eyes still sharp after all these years. Major Hartwell thought he was dealing with a scared little girl who would submit quietly to whatever he wanted to do to her. What he discovered was that scared little girls who fight back grow up to become dangerous women. Elena Rodriguez had spent her entire life proving that the world's expectations about what she could or couldn't do were irrelevant. That night in her office, she proved something even more important, that the most powerful weapon against injustice isn't legislation or policy changes or good intentions. Sometimes, it's simply the willingness to throw the first punch back.